Nobody ever told you, and that is the strangest part of all. Some of the most authentically gifted people alive today have absolutely no clue that they are, not because they are being humble, and not because they are concealing anything, but because the very qualities that make them extraordinary also make them feel, at times, as though something is fundamentally wrong inside them. That is the silent contradiction at the core of giftedness. Today we are going to explore it not through IQ numbers or academic accolades, but through the subtle psychological patterns that emerge in ordinary daily life, patterns that researchers have investigated for decades, patterns that frequently go entirely unrecognized, even by the people who carry them every single day. So, if you have ever sensed that your mind operates a bit differently, that you experience things more intensely than those around you, that you are perpetually reaching for something just beyond your grasp, stay with this, because what you are about to hear may be the first time something truly clicks into place. Sign 1 is what psychologists call overexcitability. And before you dismiss it, no, this does not mean hyperactivity or anxiety. What it means is that your nervous system absorbs the world at a level of intensity most people simply never encounter. This idea was developed by Polish psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski, who spent years researching gifted individuals and observed something consistent. They do not merely experience life, they absorb it completely. A piece of music does not just sound pleasant to you, it moves through you as if something is being unlocked. An idea does not merely grab your attention, it occupies your mind for days, sometimes weeks. A conversation does not simply fill time, it lingers within you, replaying long after the other person has forgotten it. This is not sensitivity in the fragile sense, this is sensitivity in the fully alive sense. And for most gifted people, this intensity has been quietly misidentified as a problem their entire lives when it was always a signal. Sign 2. You ask why, and you always have. As a child, you likely wore out the adults around you with your questions, not because you were being difficult, but because you genuinely could not proceed without grasping the reason behind things. Not just the rule, not just the surface-level answer. And that drive has never left you. You find it nearly impossible to take information at face value. You need to understand the mechanism beneath the pattern under the pattern, the real explanation rather than the convenient one. Cognitive scientists often describe this as a low tolerance for cognitive closure. But in a gifted person, it actually looks like the complete opposite of needing a quick answer. You are genuinely comfortable sitting inside an unanswered question for as long as necessary. While most people want the answer so they can move forward, you want the complete picture, even if it takes years. That is one of the clearest indicators of an exceptionally active mind. Sign 3. You have always felt slightly out of sync with the people around you. Not in a superior way, in a quietly, persistently lonely way. This is among the most commonly reported experiences of gifted adults, and also one of the least discussed. Researchers at the Gifted Development Center found that gifted individuals consistently describe the same things. Conversations never reach sufficient depth. Humor registers differently. Interests fail to overlap. There is always a subtle gap between who they are and who the environment seems to expect them to be. This is not about believing you are superior to others. It is about functioning on a wavelength that most people around you simply are not tuned into. And when you spend years, sometimes decades, trying to dial yourself down to blend in, it produces a kind of exhaustion that has no proper name, a weariness that sleep cannot fix. Here is something worth pausing on. These first 3 signs: the intensity, the relentless questioning, the feeling of never quite fitting in, do not resemble gifts from the outside. They look like problems, like things that need correcting. And that is precisely why so many gifted people live their entire lives without recognizing what they actually are. Sign 4. You are acutely aware of your own imperfections. Not casually, psychologists label this perfectionism, but the word does not fully capture it. This is a gap, a real, painful gap between the standard your mind establishes and what you can actually produce. And because that standard is invisible to everyone else, you end up in a peculiar position. Others look at your work and are genuinely impressed, while you already know every single place it fell short. Research on giftedness consistently links this internal perfectionism to something called high metacognitive ability. Your brain is unusually skilled at observing itself think, at evaluating, judging, and measuring its own output. That is a rare capability, but it also means you are hardwired to be your own harshest critic, not occasionally, but as a default setting. Sign 5. You learned to conceal how intelligent you were. And you learned it early. This one is quiet but runs deep. Many gifted individuals, particularly those raised in environments where being too much felt unsafe, develop what researchers call intellectual camouflage. You learn to slow down in conversations, to hold back, to let someone else voice the thing you already knew, to avoid asking the question whose answer you had already figured out, because being too quick, too curious, too intense caused people to withdraw. So you adapted. And here is where it becomes tragic that adaptation grew so practiced, so automatic, that many gifted adults genuinely lose sight of what they are capable of. The mask ceases to be something you wear, it becomes something you believe. Sign 6. Your mind draws connections that other people do not perceive, and sometimes you cannot even articulate how you arrived there. This is called divergent thinking, the ability to link ideas, systems, and experiences that seem entirely unrelated. A gifted mind does not travel in straight lines, it moves in webs, in sudden leaps that feel like intuition, but are actually the product of your brain performing something remarkable beneath the surface. Neuroscience researchers have discovered that gifted individuals frequently exhibit greater connectivity between brain regions that do not typically communicate with each other. This means your brain is not simply working harder, it is structured differently, built to detect patterns in places others never think to search. Sign 7 will surprise some of you, an almost overpowering sense of justice. Gifted individuals tend to develop strong moral sensitivity very early in life. This is not about obeying rules, it is a visceral, physical reaction to unfairness. A feeling deep in your chest that something is genuinely, fundamentally wrong when people are treated unjustly. The world is full of minor injustices. Most people register them briefly, then move on. You cannot move on, you carry them. And over time, that burden becomes its own form of exhaustion. Sign 8. You have an unusual relationship with boredom. Not merely that you get bored easily, but that boredom feels almost like a physical sensation for you, an itch you cannot scratch, a pressure with no outlet. Researchers link this to what is called a high need for stimulation, a lower threshold for understimulation in people with a highly active prefrontal cortex. In simple terms, your brain requires more input, and when it does not receive what it needs, it does not wait patiently. It begins generating its own material through worry, and through fantasy, through restlessness that looks from the outside like inattention. What most people interpret as you not paying attention is actually your mind urgently searching for something worth engaging with. Sign 9. You experience emotions with unusual depth. And someone has probably told you that you are too sensitive more than once. The emotional landscape of a gifted person is not quieter than average, it is considerably louder. Research by psychologist Elaine Aron on high sensitivity aligns closely with what giftedness studies consistently reveal: someone who processes emotional experience more thoroughly, more slowly, and more completely than most. This is not a character flaw, this is neurology. The amygdala, the brain region that processes emotion, appears to operate with heightened reactivity in highly intelligent individuals. You do not feel more because something is broken in you, you feel more because your brain was constructed to feel more. And sign 10, perhaps the most revealing of all: you have never fully believed the positive things people say about you. This is known as impostor phenomenon, And while it affects many people, it runs exceptionally deep in those who are gifted. Here is why: the higher your internal standard, the more unattainable it becomes to feel like you have genuinely met it, even when the proof is right before you. Even when others can plainly see it. Your awareness of everything you still do not know is so vast, and your mind is perpetually reaching further, that the sensation of having arrived never quite materializes. There is always more ground to cover, always something additional to comprehend. So here is what connects all of this. Giftedness, in the genuine psychological sense, is not about outstanding achievement. It is not a trophy or a test score at its essence. It is simply a different way of navigating the world more intensely, more deeply, more relentlessly, and because that difference seldom feels like an advantage from the inside, because it arrives with weight, with loneliness, with a mind that never truly settles. Many gifted people spend decades feeling profoundly different without ever understanding the reason. If several of these signs felt less like a checklist and more like a quiet recognition of something you have always known about yourself, then perhaps the most valuable takeaway is not information, it is permission. Permission to stop treating your intensity as a defect. Permission to stop apologizing for how deeply you think, how powerfully you feel, how impossible it is for you to remain on the surface of anything. Because those are not problems, they never were. They are the shape of a particular kind of mind, and truly understanding that shape is where something important can finally begin.